Well, hello, that's me again. Today is June 22nd, 2023, and June 22 is a very special date for Russians and for former Soviet people. And everybody knows, probably, who didn't sleep all their classes on the basic history, even in the Western world, that it was June 22nd, 1941, that Hitler and his marshals and generals decided that, you know what, by assembling the greatest army ever assembled. There were more than 4.5 million people together with the Axis. There was not just Hitler. There were Italian, there were even Finnish troops actually at that stage, but primarily Europeans, joint European force, including even Hungarians, Romanians, what have you. And they decided to invade Soviet Union. And Hitler and his generals have been on record that and Hitler himself and his generals, that basically, yeah, the Soviet Union was colossus on the legs of clay, and you just hit this door and it will cave in or break from the hinges, and that will be easy. And by the end of the summer, we should be done. Well, boy, did they miscalculate. And obviously, this is a tragedy. There is no family in the former Soviet Union who doesn't have people who fought and died on the fronts of what became the Great Patriotic War. 27 million in general. Out of those 27 million, more than 16 millions were civilians, and the rest were obviously the soldiers of the Red Army of all kinds of ethnicities: Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Jews, Muslims of all kinds, Tatars, Bashkirs, what have you. All people of the Soviet Union fought, and this is a very sad date. But kind of in Russian history, things do repeat themselves, and here we are again today with the basically combined West trying to do the same thing as Hitler did in 1941. The only difference is, of course, that Hitler generals have been on the orders of magnitude more competent and able in terms of military planning than just about any general from Pentagon or what have you. And this is becoming absolutely ridiculous when you look at this today. And when you have these people from CNN, which is primarily the fake news NBS spreaders and peddlers, and they have to admit now that Chief National Security Correspondent published today at 7:40 a.m., and they complained that early stages of Ukrainian counteroffensive not meeting expectations, Western officials tell CNN. Well, of course they don't, and of course they couldn't meet any expectations because, as I already stated, these are not Hitler. This is not Wehrmacht guys. This is not Prussian general staff. We're talking about people who literally, on a bunch of US generals from Pentagon, they wouldn't be allowed to command a battalion in the Russian army. And we have this whole slaughter thing going on right now, although since yesterday, I believe the dynamics of the losses of Ukrainian forces somewhat changed, and they begin to lose less, still huge numbers, but less than in the first 2 weeks of this so-called counter-offensive. Well, in reality, it is offensive, but you know what, you cannot explain average person on CNN or MSNBC, what is the difference. But the point is that even Vladimir Putin is verbatim now that they just basically exhausted. They lost, as Mr. Shoigu told Mr. Putin, and Putin was explaining that thanks to the courage and heroism of our soldiers and the readiness of commanders to repulse any aggressive action against Russia, it seems to me that the enemy has no chance. They understand this, which is why they stopped. Yeah, they continue to do those probing things, but if you look attentively, Shoigu reported to Putin today that more than 13,000 have been killed, KIA, so you can multiply it by 2.5 at least. That will be the wounded on the Ukrainian side. And then This is what Putin says also yesterday. Oddly enough, it is a slow burn at the moment because the enemy is sustaining serious personnel and equipment losses. Putin said, as of early this morning, our men had taken out 245 tanks and about 678 armored vehicles of various types, to say nothing of the enemy casualties, which are substantial. So the Russian Ministry of Defense for this morning, on the aggregate of the KIAs in VSU, reports about 17,000. So you basically can understand the scale of the catastrophe for the armed forces of Ukraine. And as Mr. Kartapolov, the guy who commanded actually very successful Russian operation in in Syria in 2016-2017. He continues 2 days ago that if it continues at this pace, I believe we will finish repelling this offensive in 3 weeks and move on to dynamic action ourselves. And so we have to keep in mind that Kartapolov, while being the chair, I believe, of the National Security Committee in Russian Duma, but he's certainly, very important leader, military leader in Russia, and he has his connections, obviously, in the Russian Defense Ministry. But all signs point out now to the fact that Russians are poised to start something, and this something could be very big. And when you look attentively at all those faces of Mr. Zelensky and his cabal, you can see yourself there a little bit on the downside. And to demonstrate to you what is going on in general, and to understand that how the combined West is losing its reputation, speaking plainly, it already lost it, especially military ones. So here we have Mr. Lavrov, one and only Sergei Lavrov, basically calling the United States a chicken, and calling the NATO without United States is nothing and nobody's. But so here it is. This is him 2 days ago, well, actually a day and a half ago. If NATO through the mouth of Stoltenberg once again declares that they are against freezing of the conflict, as they say, the conflict in Ukraine, then they want to fight. Lavrov told the press conference, well, let them fight. We are ready for this. We have long understood the goals of NATO in the situation around Ukraine, which have been formed for many years. This is Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russian Federation, permanent member of the Security Council. So you understand, when he says this, that somebody already speaking openly in Russian that, yeah, they're chickens, they hide behind the proxies. Obviously, neither NATO as a whole nor United States in particular can basically produce anything, the force required for any kind of serious action on the combined arms, the scale of which we have against Russia in whatever is formerly known as Ukraine. So they will continue to do what, they do, as my friend Larry Johnson says, more cowbell. And they will continue to throw whatever they have. They don't have much left, really. And until, as Putin already openly stating this, not to mention Medvedev, not to mention Lavrov, not to mention many other people, including Mr. Shoigu, well, they want to fight for the last Ukrainian, well, we will accommodate. Yeah, let them fight to the last Ukrainian. And this is the only strategy they know, because obviously most of those people are highly uncultured, highly uneducated, and I'm not talking only about the political decision makers in Biden administration, and which is it is a catastrophe for the country. They drive the United States into the ground practically completely. But I'm talking about the military people in the combined West, and then suddenly we're talking about people in the United States who are military professionals. Some of them continue to live, especially all those generals from the so-called Institute for Misunderstanding the War. Well, I'm being facetious. It is allegedly Institute for the Study of War. They study nothing there. I mean, they do not have toolkit. And then you have all those Petraeus, Skins, and other generals on CNN and MSNBC. These guys parading themselves as clowns. Literally, I do have sort of corporate understanding, so to speak, and sensibilities in terms of U.S. military. But when you have generals like that, then there's no surprise that the United States cannot win a single freaking war against the guys with the sandals and RPG-7s. And when you look at this and like, yeah, they really do not understand what they're dealing with, except for the guys who certainly do not have voice. They sit somewhere in Pentagon, they sit in those commands and plan or try to plan. And here what is interesting, I already has shown to you how West Point, U.S. Military Academy in West Point reacts to this special military operation. And here there's another thing, so to speak, about West Point, and here's another, it's called Modern War Institute. I don't know how they can really study modern war there without having war correlates, much of it, which of course is classified on the Russian side. The only thing they can study in terms of special military operation is those very limited, you can probably have quantities, but you will not see the dynamics. I'm talking about ISR capabilities of the United States, which are extensive, obviously. But again, you need to be on the ground to understand this. And as naturally as it goes, they rely primarily on the Kiev regime propaganda primarily, and of course whatever they can distill from their ISR. The only thing they can do obviously is go to the sit reps by Russian Ministry of Defense, which is primarily dry operational and sometimes tactical reports, and of course the attrition rates, and that's the only thing they can rely on from Russians, because of course nobody will provide them with any kind of serious war correlates, which of course goes in terms of the expenditure of ammo, losses, dynamics of losses, and of course the combat effectiveness of the weapon systems. And fact is, the combat effectiveness of the weapon systems, what Russian armed forces are using, is astonishing. And this is the thing which cannot, so this guys begin to write all those things like that. For example, this is Randy Norman from a week ago from the Netherlands military, and he writes this article into the West Point Modern War Institute. Yet there are features of the war and of both sides' performance that are lost in this simplified narrative. Oh, absolutely, because obviously they do not have access to Russian narrative, if you wish, but not narrative, of course. I'm talking about real numbers, real operational coefficients, and those war correlates which are classified. And here he is. Among these are the fact that despite the numerous and obvious shortcomings displayed by Russian military forces' performance and practice, I wonder if he can list them, but sure, on a conceptual level they are actually ahead of their time, tracing nearly a century of Soviet and Russian strategic culture. This is the guy who says that the Russian way of war in Ukraine, a military approach, 9 decades in the making. Well, good, at least he recognized this, and then he continues to write about this kill chain, and look what he says. We are witnessing the maturation of deep attack capabilities that were developed during 1970s and 1980s. Well, it's sort of correct. And then he continues that, however, current battlefield conditions are adding the related difficulty of achieving the concentration of forces necessary for establishing the main effort during offensive operations. This is reducing large-scale engagement and thereby necessitating of concentration and synchronization of effect rather than a traditional physical massing of troops. Oh no, Captain Obvious. I wrote 3 books about it. However, he continues, in turn this places an extra burden on command and control, especially when contested by electronic warfare. Only by disrupting the opponent's kill chain can larger formations regain the ability to concentrate and engage in maneuver warfare. During the war in Ukraine, superiority in kill chain effectiveness has become one of the prime objectives for both sides. In this war and any other characterized by same dynamics, this superiority becomes an essential condition for victory. Well, I have news for this. What's his name? Captain Randy Norman is an officer in the Royal Netherlands Army. That actually there is no both sides trying to become the prime objective in terms of disrupting of the kill chain. Armed forces of Ukraine and NATO kill chain have been disrupted already. And when you look at the slaughter which is happening, in terms of the armed forces of Ukraine, to the point that they now even declared the full mobilization in Kiev. Forget about this Western Ukrainian oblast or regions such as Ivano-Frankovsk. That tells you something. You know why? Because they cannot penetrate, let alone break through the first line of defense. Why they cannot break through the first line of defense? Well, because Russians actually studied, instead of the Gulf War, which General Klokotov, the chief of the strategy department of the Russian Academy of General Staff in 1992, declared that you cannot use it as the standard because it's absolutely anomalous war. Basically, it's not war. It was beating the crap out of the grossly inferior enemy. Russians have been studying their own, obviously, experience and, of course, their own military technological development, and they were actually producing it on their own. To prove this, again, we go back to my book, which is of course, have been published 4 years ago. And here it is. Look what I wrote about this. This is the actually explanation of what happens when, for example, in 2011, when DCGS, Distributed Common Ground System, malfunctioned during the US and South Korean joint exercises, and malfunctioned and left US staff in a complete situational darkness, was a good reminder of the vulnerabilities even most advanced systems exhibit under some real war circumstances. Real war being the ability of a near peer or peer to disrupt the enemy's electronic systems. Well, guess what? Russians are champions of the world in this respect, and again, we didn't see all Russian electronic warfare and countermeasures capabilities yet. We saw only something. But then, of course, I have to remind this guy who writes into this West Point Modern War Institute, this also from the same of my book, as you can see yourself. And this is about the definition on what Russians were doing since very, very early times, namely from late 60s, early 70s. RMA, which was real revolution in military affairs, was initially MTR, military technological revolution, introduced by Soviet military theoreticians in 1970s. They identified 3 distinct MTRs in the 20th century as follows. And the first one, of course, was the advent of motorization, the airplane and all that thing, mechanization of the warfare. The development of the second was the development of ballistic missiles and atomic weapons in the end of the World War II, with the second MTR maturation in 1970s. Why it was maturation in 1970s is the separate issue which we're not going to address here. And of course, the third MTR came about with the advent of high precision, precision-guided munitions and standoff munitions, which may be launched at a distances sufficient to allow attacking. And let me put it this way, many people still, repeat about the skirmish in the Middle East in 1991 as some kind of, oh my God, the revolution and things like that. It should not come as a surprise that in 1970s, Soviet Union was developing precision-guided munitions and standoff weapons really, really actively. And fact is, you can see some results of it today. United States, let alone NATO, in terms of standoff weapons, is not even in the same league in terms of range, let alone speed, and in terms of accuracy and ability to overcome electronic countermeasures. And this is what to remind you, something to give you an example what it is. As you can see yourself here, it's the cockpit of the Su-24. This one is M. It's a kind of model which have been upgraded from the basic model which saw the first service in 1974. This was upgraded, I believe, in 1980s, end of 1980s. And as you can see yourself, and the webs on the weapons operator on the right side, you have all those radar and TV and channels which can project both laser rangefinders and laser guidance. You can conduct laser guidance of your weapons. And guess what? This aircraft, together with Su-25s, have been using precision-guided munitions, both TV guided, laser guided, all kinds of electronic means, radar guided, in Afghanistan starting from 1979. Su-25s. There you go. You have MiG-27s. Look it up. and the the use of those weapons was extremely extraordinary. They were flying their precision-guided munitions inside the caves where Mujahideens were hiding. So, and that was actually 10 years before the United States actually performed, so to speak, primarily for their public and primarily for the PR. In reality, of course, the United States and coalition bombed the crap out of Saddam's army by just good old, free-falling munitions. 90% of those munitions used on Saddam's army were free-falling and not guided, and they were no precision weapons. And when you look at this, it's like, how to explain, guys, Russians have been at this business even earlier than you are. Look at the, Russian, for example, anti-shipping missiles. This is as precision guided as standoff and you can get today, and it's all, of course, result into such things like 3M22 Zircon, Kinzhals, and what have you. And then there you go. Practice, empirical proof is out there. It's a mountain of the evidence. It's absolutely the dominating mountain of the evidence of how you do and how you approach the war. And now they obviously sit there. They cannot even find their own as in a brightly lit room with their both hands, because they never saw anything like this. And if you're talking about shock and awe, this is your shock and awe. And when you look at this, you begin to understand how incompetent they are in terms of planning, how they do not understand what is happening. Just to give you another, this is from proof. This is from the declassified CIA documents. This is the report in 1986, which about the development of Russian, for example, their laser-guided high-precision munitions, such as the artillery shells. Evidence for the program they're running. We believe that the Soviets independently embarked on their own guided artillery projectile development program in the early 1970s, about the same time or possibly earlier than the US Army program. We also believe that the Soviet program successfully developed a copperhead-like precision-guided munition, which we refer to as Copperheadsky. When you look today at the videos, for example, how all those Western and old Soviet tanks are burning, and how all those Bradleys are burning on the battlefield, and you see them being hit not by Lancets, not necessarily by ATGMs, but by artillery shells. People should ask, how is this possible? Very simple. Russians use Krasnopol and other basically range of their precision-guided artillery shells, which, they can hit you into the hatch on the turret of your tank, and you're done, basically. And that's what many people still cannot wrap their brains around. This is the high-tech as it comes, and especially it is high-tech in terms of the net-centric warfare. And this is what is so important about this conflict. And now, when you see how it is all happening this way, guess what? They even report, that, Ukrainian tank crews feigning damage to avoid finding Russians. Der Spiegel reports. Because there is a scandal happening now between VSU, Armed Forces of Ukraine, and Bundeswehr. Ukrainian tank crews have been faking malfunctions of their tanks to justify not going into the combat against Russian forces, Der Spiegel reports. The magazine spoke to 3 German-trained Ukrainian troops who were among the crews of the 2 Leopard 2A6 tanks provided by Kiev by the Bundeswehr. And they said that their tanks suck, actually, and they are death traps. And you know what? Of course, Bundeswehr is just absolutely incensed. How could they say this to the great, German, tank building tradition? Well, that's what it is. I'm sorry, guys. People already openly laugh at those French tanks, or rather, light tanks, if you wish. And then you look at people openly say on the front lines, I know it for sure, give us Challengers. Because everybody wants to, burn the Challengers. Plus, they pay really well. There's a price list for the annihilated Western equipment is pretty good. You know, you can live really well after that. If you and Russians were blowing those Leopards and, you know, Ames and Bradleys and what have you. Yeah, you already saw yourself that Mr. Putin already stated 248, I believe, or 264. You can always scroll back and, you know, or roll back the video. You will see yourself the number of the tanks alone. So it's going really well. Production is really good. I mean, in terms of producing the piles of the mangled metal from the Western NATO weapons. And this is the thing which they cannot take it. They need to live with this reality. They need to really comprehend what is going on. But of course, as we already mentioned, Larry Johnson's and of course famous SNL skit, it's more cowbell. That's the only thing they can do. But you know what? Eventually they're going to run out of tanks too. And I'm talking about their own tanks, not just Ukrainian. And to understand what is going on, I want to point out to this very specific news going back to this issue of Macron trying to impose himself onto BRICS summit. Here it is. Mr. Ryabkov, first deputy of the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, he states officially in Sochi today, Russian Foreign Ministry considers the visit of Macron to BRICS absolutely inappropriate. And here's how he explains correctly, obviously, that leaders of the states which conduct enemy policies in regards to Russia absolutely inappropriate on the summit of BRICS. Mr. Ryabkov stated it, and of course he explains that France supplies all those Scalps missiles which attack primarily civilian targets. France supplies armor to armed forces of Ukraine. So why should this guy Macron, and who means absolutely nothing, be invited? Although Ryabkov makes the kind of, gives this caveat that in the end, it is up to South African government, because they are the hosts of this meeting and they can essentially formally issue the invitation. But why would Macron go there? And I will repeat again, Macron is the Rothschild's child. And Rothschilds, they are really worried because, you know what, they have the information which they do not read in CNN or this trash tabloid Wall Street Journal. They have their own analysts and hedge funds, which of course try to get as much accurate information as possible. And they understand where the whole combined West is going. And when you look at this, Macron wants to grab sleeves of Putin or Xi or, anybody who will listen to him, because he needs to make an arrangements for parking capitals of his owners. His owners are Rothschild's family. And that's why he is so, imposing, to put it mildly. Well, he's an arrogant ass, obviously, but still. And Russia already basically expressed her position on this matter, so we'll see how the South African government will react to that. But of course, the main idea of Macron is to obviously somehow engage Comrade Xi, and if possible to have Putin listen to him and try to explain something. I don't think so Putin will lower himself to Macron's level, but this is what they're trying to do in obviously facing the catastrophe. And that is why this nauseating talk about Russian nuclear weapons, this is all PR and speculations, and of course they continue to do what they always do, PR. And when you look at those American generals who speak to the mainstream media in the United States, this is shame. This is absolutely complete the unbecoming of the professional military officers. This is ridiculous. Those people have no honor, no nothing. Well, then again, they are losers. They lost everything they ever fought. So, and in conclusion, obviously, I want to say that please, guys, those who can do it, contact your senator or congressperson, congressman or congresswoman, and try to remind them about the fate of Gonzalo Lira, who accidentally is the U.S. citizen, apart from being the citizen of Chile. We should keep him in our thoughts and prayers. And that Plus, I want to kind of conclude today with this situation with this Titan vehicle, which got crushed near the Titanic. I read the news today that the guy, the owner, CEO of this corporation, he have been dismissing left and right American submarine commanders. Of course, what those guys who commanded those nuclear-powered subs, what do they know? And guess what he told them when those people, those professional officers, American submarines are one of the best in the world, you know, and Americans' professionalism in the submarine warfare is outstanding. So here you have those people who commanded things which, and of course, had the crews above 100 people, and they carry sometimes strategic missiles, you know, and here you have the guy, the CEO, who said that he dismissed them, that the safety at some point of time becomes the impediment for the development of his ideas, and that safety is absolutely a ridiculous thing. Those white boys, as he stated, with their commanding experience, try to impede the development of his batiscafs or whatever. Well, what can I say? There you go. If the commanding officers of the nuclear-powered submarines are not authorities on this, and some guy who sells his crap, you know, and death traps for $250,000 and now killed five people, and he thinks that they are incompetent, then what can I say? That we're really at the end of the line in this particular case. This is your private business in those things, guys. This is what they do. They really only make money, and the fact that he killed 5 people, I don't think so he will have any, compunction about that. It's just, that's what they do. Hey, profit. And this is what I wanted to finish with today, guys. And as always, those who like what I do, please subscribe to my channel and support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee too. And I'll be talking to you later, guys. Have a nice rest of your week. Bye-bye.